Answer this, and I'll give you $100 million, the Japanese CEO sneered. Then the maid's daughter did and shocked everyone. You solve my little problem, right here, right now. Do that, and I'll give you $100 million. The words rolled off Kenji Tanaka's tongue with the cruel precision of a blade. The billionaire CEO stood beneath the glowing mathematical equations of his own creation, the so-called Tanaka Conjecture, while laughter rippled through the gala crowd. His target? Not a rival executive, not a professor, but a janitor, a mother in a gray uniform who had come only to clean spilled champagne. Her hands trembled, her voice broke, until another voice cut the silence. My mother accepts your offer. Every head turned. A child had stepped into the light. What started as a cruel joke ended as a challenge that would shake the world of mathematics. This is the story of how a maid's daughter solved the impossible. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. A question whispered in contempt would be answered with a legacy forged in silence. The promise was a joke meant to wound, but it would land on a girl who held the history of numbers in her heart. The atrium of the Wallace University Mathematics Institute was a cathedral of knowledge. It was a vast, open space, 3 stories high, with walls of glass that looked out onto a campus glowing under the soft lights of evening. The floors were polished black granite, reflecting the abstract sculptures and the constellations of recessed lighting like a dark, still lake. An autumn chill clung to the air outside, but inside, it was warm, filled with the murmur of quiet conversation and the scent of catered canapes and old books. This was a place built to honor the human mind. The names of history's greatest mathematicians were etched into the marble frieze that circled the top floor. Newton, Euclid, Gauss, Euler. They were the saints of this secular church, and tonight, a new name was being celebrated, not for a discovery, but for a donation. That name was Kenji Tanaka. He was the sun in this universe, and everyone else was a planet held in his orbit. Mr. Tanaka was the CEO of Tanatech, a global technology empire. He was a man tailored by immense wealth and power. His suit was a whisper of dark silk, so perfectly fitted it seemed to have been woven around him. His hair was a severe, perfect black, touched with silver at the temples. He was not a tall man, but his presence filled the room. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, missed nothing. They swept over the crowd of professors, trustees, and wealthy alumni, assessing, calculating, and quietly dismissing. Tonight was the inauguration of the Tanaka Center for Advanced Theoretical Mathematics. His 10-figure donation had built this entire wing. The university, in its gratitude, had thrown this lavish gala. Speeches had been made. Toasts had been raised. Mr. Tanaka had smiled his thin, disciplined smile, a smile that never quite reached his eyes. It was the smile of a man who did not enjoy things, but acquired them. At the center of the atrium, on a massive, 80-foot digital screen, was the evening's main spectacle. It was not a piece of art, but a challenge, a monument to Mr. Tanaka's intellectual vanity. It was a mathematical problem of staggering complexity, a series of equations and notations that, to the uninitiated, looked like a dense and beautiful alien script. It was called the Tanaka Conjecture. Mr. Tanaka had not invented it, of course. It was a variation of an old, notoriously unsolved problem in number theory. But he had funded a team of the world's best mathematicians to refine it, to make it even more impossible. And then he had attached his name to it, along with a staggering prize of $100 million for anyone who could solve it. It was a brilliant piece of public relations. It positioned him not just as a titan of industry, but as a patron of pure thought, a man who grappled with the fundamental mysteries of the universe. In reality, the prize was a fortress, its walls built of impossible numbers, designed to prove that only he was powerful enough to even pose such a question. The professors and academics in the room would glance at the screen, shake their heads with a mixture of awe and professional frustration, and then return to their wine. They knew it was a beast, a problem that could consume a dozen careers and yield nothing. It was a conversation piece, a symbol of the unattainable. Moving along the edges of this grand event, almost invisible in her simple gray uniform, was Susan Miller. She was a member of the university's janitorial staff, assigned to keep the gala pristine. She moved with a quiet grace born of years of trying not to be noticed. Her hands, though chapped and weary, were deft as she collected empty glasses and cocktail napkins, placing them on her service cart. Her face was a mask of tired politeness. But behind her calm brown eyes, a storm was raging. The soft music, the clinking glasses, the low hum of intellectual chatter. It was all a painful reminder of a world she could see but never enter. It was a reminder of the mountain of bills on her small kitchen table. Most of them were medical bills, printed on stark, unforgiving paper. They were the legacy of the husband she had lost 2 years ago, a good man who had been taken by a long, slow, and very expensive illness. The debt was a physical weight. It sat on her chest when she tried to sleep. It was the reason she worked this job and another one on the weekends cleaning houses. It was all for her daughter, Chloe, to keep their small apartment, to keep food on the table, to give her the one thing Susan was determined to provide, a chance. A chance at a life far from the quiet desperation of scrubbing floors for people who looked right through her. Chloe was here tonight. She was waiting for her mother in a small, empty classroom down the hall. A quiet, bookish 12-year-old. She had brought her homework, promising to be no trouble. Susan had hesitated to bring her, but she couldn't afford a babysitter. Chloe had her father's bright, curious mind, and a startlingly serious demeanor for a girl her age. She was the one good, unbreakable thing left in Susan's life. A small commotion suddenly broke the calm rhythm of the evening. A guest, a portly man in a tweed jacket, had gestured too enthusiastically while telling a story and had knocked a tray of champagne flutes from a passing waiter's hands. The crash of breaking glass was sharp and loud. Champagne and shards of crystal sprayed across the polished granite floor. The accident happened to be just a few feet from Kenji Tanaka. He had been in a conversation with the university president, Dr. Croft. He stopped mid-sentence, his face darkening with annoyance. The interruption, the mess, the sudden breach of order, it offended him. His sharp eyes scanned for someone to hold responsible. The waiter was already stammering apologies, his face white with fear. The man in the tweed jacket was looking flustered and embarrassed. But Mr. Tanaka's gaze swept past them both. It landed on the nearest, most convenient target. It landed on the woman in the gray uniform. It landed on Susan. She had been on the other side of the spill, already moving forward with her cart to help clean up. She froze when she saw his eyes on her. "You?" His voice was not loud, but it was as cold and sharp as the broken glass on the floor. It cut through the surrounding chatter, creating a small pocket of sudden silence. "This is your responsibility. This area should be kept clear. My guests should not be subjected to this kind of clumsiness." Susan's heart began to pound. "Sir, it was an accident. I was just about to." "You were not doing your job," he cut her off, his voice laced with contempt. He took a step toward her. The university president looked uncomfortable but said nothing. No one contradicted Kenji Tanaka. "You people are paid to be invisible and to ensure things like this do not happen. It seems you are failing at both." The public nature of the rebuke was a slap in the face. Susan felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. She could feel the eyes of the guests turning towards them, their curiosity piqued by the small drama. She stared at the floor, wanting it to open up and swallow her. This was the part of the job she hated most. Not the work itself, but the casual, unthinking cruelty of the people she served. The constant, stinging reminder of her station. But Mr. Tanaka was not finished. He was a man who enjoyed making a point, and he now had an audience. A wicked, theatrical idea lit up his cold eyes. He gestured with a flick of his wrist towards the giant screen that dominated the atrium. "Perhaps your skills are better suited to a different kind of cleanup," he said, a cruel smirk touching his lips. The guests leaned in, sensing a performance. "I don't understand, sir," Susan whispered. "That," he said, pointing to the Tanaka Conjecture. "It is messy. A problem. You seem to be surrounded by problems." The small crowd around them chuckled. "You clean floors. You make things tidy. Why don't you tidy that up for me?" The suggestion was so bizarre, so absurdly insulting, that the chuckles grew into open laughter. The sound echoed in the vast space. It was the sound of wealthy, powerful people enjoying the humiliation of someone they considered beneath them. Susan felt dizzy. She could not comprehend the level of malice required to mock someone so publicly. I can't do that, sir," she said, her voice trembling. It's mathematics. Oh, is that what it is? Mr. Tanaka said, feigning surprise. I thought it might be a new kind of modern art. The laughter grew louder. He was enjoying himself now. He decided to escalate the spectacle. He took another step closer, his voice dropping to a low, taunting growl. I am a generous man, he announced, turning to his audience. This woman, she clearly has a difficult life. The world has not been kind to her. He waved a dismissive hand. So, I will make her a proposition. A little game. He turned his sharp eyes back to Susan. You, the cleaning woman. You solve my little problem. Right here. Right now. You answer the question. If you do, he grinned, a predator's grin, I will give you the prize money. $100 million. The full amount. You could pay your little bills with that, couldn't you? Buy a nice house. Never clean another floor in your life. What do you say? The atrium erupted. The laughter was deafening now, a wave of ridicule that crashed over Susan. People were pulling out their phones, wanting to record the sheer arrogance of the moment. The great Kenji Tanaka, offering $100 million to his janitor if she could solve an impossible math problem. The punchline was built in. It was a story they would tell for years. Susan stood frozen, trapped in a waking nightmare. Tears burned at the back of her eyes. She wanted to run, to scream, to simply cease to exist. She was surrounded by a cage of staring eyes and mocking laughter. She had never felt so utterly and completely helpless. Then, a voice, as clear and steady as a small bell, cut through the noise. My mother accepts your offer. The laughter stopped. It died so quickly it was as if a switch had been thrown. A stunned, absolute silence fell over the atrium. Every single head turned towards the source of the voice. Stepping out from the hallway that led to the classrooms was a girl. She was small for her age, with a cascade of straight, pale blonde hair that fell to her shoulders. She wore simple jeans, worn sneakers, and a plain blue sweatshirt. She was an island of ordinary childhood in a sea of adult wealth and sophistication. It was Chloe. She had heard the commotion and had come to see what was wrong. She walked forward, her steps calm and deliberate. She moved past the stunned professors and the wealthy donors, her gaze fixed on one person and one person only, Kenji Tanaka. Her eyes, a startlingly bright blue, held no trace of fear. They held a cold, focused fire that was unnerving in a child so young. She stopped beside her mother. She gently took the rag from Susan's trembling hand and placed it on the service cart. Then she took her mother's hand, her small fingers wrapping firmly around Susan's. Kenji Tanaka stared at the child, momentarily thrown off balance. His perfectly staged humiliation had been interrupted by an unexpected character. A flash of irritation crossed his face, but it was quickly replaced by a deeper amusement. This was a new, even more pathetic twist. The joke had just become funnier. "And who are you?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "I am Chloe Miller," the girl said, her voice steady and clear, carrying easily across the silent room. "And on behalf of my mother, I accept your deal." The silence that followed Chloe's declaration was different from the one before. The mockery was gone, replaced by a tense, electric curiosity. This was no longer a simple act of bullying. It was a confrontation. A child, looking no older than 12, had just stood up to the most powerful man in the room. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Susan looked down at her daughter, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Chloe, no," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. "Honey, what are you doing? We have to go." She tried to pull her hand away, to lead Chloe out of the spotlight, away from this dangerous man. But Chloe's grip was surprisingly strong. She did not look at her mother. Her bright blue eyes were still locked on Kenji Tanaka. "You made a public offer, Mr. Tanaka," Chloe said, her voice ringing with a strange, adult authority. "You offered my mother $100 million if she could solve the problem on that screen. We accept." For the first time all evening, Kenji Tanaka seemed unsure of himself. He had been playing a cruel game with a powerless piece, and suddenly a new piece had appeared on the board, one with rules he did not understand. He looked from the terrified mother to the defiant child. He could feel the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on him. He was trapped by his own arrogance. To back down now, in front of this audience, would make him look weak, afraid of a little girl. A slow, reptilian smile spread across his face. He would call her bluff. The failure would be even more crushing, The humiliation for the mother and child even more complete. "All right," he said, his voice booming once more as he regained control. "The girl has spirit. I admire that." He turned to the crowd, playing the part of a magnanimous patron. "Did everyone hear? The janitor's daughter accepts the challenge on her mother's behalf." A few nervous, scattered laughs rippled through the guests. The mood had shifted. This felt sharper now, more personal. Dr. Croft, the university president, finally stepped forward, looking deeply uneasy. "Mr. Tanaka, perhaps this has gone far enough. She's only a child." "Nonsense, doctor," Tanaka said with a dismissive wave. "The child wants to play. Let us see what she can do. It will be educational for everyone." His eyes glinted with malice. "The stage is yours, little girl." He gestured grandly toward the massive screen at the front of the atrium. Chloe gave her mother's hand a final, reassuring squeeze. "It's okay, Mama," she whispered, so softly only Susan could hear. He made a promise. Everyone heard him. Then she let go and walked towards the dais where the screen's control panel was located. The crowd parted for her, a silent sea of tuxedos and evening gowns. Her small frame, in its simple sweatshirt and jeans, seemed impossibly fragile against the backdrop of immense wealth and intellectual grandeur. Mr. Tanaka crossed his arms, the picture of smug confidence. His associates were smirking, already imagining the pathetic outcome. They pictured the girl staring blankly at the screen, or perhaps scribbling some childish drawing before bursting into tears. They were expecting a comedy. But Chloe did not go directly to the control panel. Instead, she stopped about 20 feet from the screen and began to walk slowly from one side to the other. Her steps were silent on the granite floor. Her head was tilted up, and her eyes were not looking at the screen with childish wonder. They were narrowed in intense concentration, scanning the complex web of equations with a seriousness that was profoundly unsettling. She was not just looking at it. She was reading it. She stopped at the far right of the screen, then walked to the far left. She was taking in the problem as a whole, seeing its shape, its structure. A professor of mathematics in the front row murmured to a colleague, "What is she doing? It's not a painting." Mr. Tanaka's smile widened. The absurdity was richer than he could have imagined. "Are you having trouble finding a place to start, little one?" he called out, his voice thick with mock sympathy. Chloe ignored him completely. She finished her slow patrol and walked to the small lectern on the dais. On it was a wireless stylus, used for interacting with the digital screen. She picked it up. She held it in her small hand, feeling its weight. The tool of a modern mathematician. She turned and faced the screen. For a long moment, she simply stood there, her eyes closed. The room was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the servers in the building's basement. The guests exchanged confused glances. This was not the bumbling, tearful failure they had been led to expect. This was something else. Something strange. The child's calm was unnerving. It felt ancient, out of place in her young body. It was the calm of a grandmaster before the first move, of a composer hearing the entire symphony in their head before writing the first note. Susan watched her daughter, her heart a painful mix of terror and a strange, unexplainable flicker of hope. She had seen Chloe like this before, but never in a place like this. At home, Chloe would sit for hours with her father's old college textbooks, books filled with symbols Susan could never understand. She would fill notebooks with her elegant, precise handwriting, covering pages with equations. Susan had always thought it was just a game, a way for Chloe to feel close to the brilliant, gentle man she still missed so dearly. She never imagined it was anything more. After a long, silent moment, Chloe opened her eyes. She stepped up to the screen. It towered over her, a black wall of infinite complexity. With a smooth, practiced motion, she touched the stylus to the surface. It came to life, a small, bright cursor blinking in the darkness. The crowd held its breath. The billionaire, the janitor, the little girl, and the impossible problem. The performance was about to begin. Chloe took a deep breath, the kind one takes before a deep dive into cold water. Then she began to write. Her first marks on the screen were not numbers. They were not variables. They were a series of geometric shapes. A hexagon, a dodecahedron, and a series of interlocking circles. They were elegant and perfectly rendered. A low murmur of confusion rippled through the assembled academics. "What is this?" one professor whispered. "Is she doodling? This is number theory, not geometry." Mr. Tanaka let out a short, triumphant laugh. It seems our prodigy is an artist, not a mathematician. The tension in the room broke. A wave of relieved laughter swept through the crowd. This was it. This was the punchline they had been waiting for. The joke had landed. The comedy had reached its climax. It was just a silly little girl, scribbling pictures. Kenji Tanaka threw his head back and laughed, a loud, braying sound of victory. "Oh, this is better than I hoped," he roared. "She's redecorating my conjecture." His guests joined in, their laughter a cruel chorus that echoed off the high glass walls. The strange tension was gone, replaced by the comfortable, familiar order of the world they knew. A world where the daughters of cleaning ladies did not solve unsolvable problems. Susan buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. The humiliation was absolute. It was so much worse than she had ever feared. She had failed to protect her child. Only one person in the room was not laughing. In front of the giant screen, Chloe stood perfectly still. She stared at the shapes she had drawn, her hand holding the stylus hovering over the surface. A single tear traced a slow path down her cheek, but her expression was not one of defeat. It was one of intense, furious concentration. She had not been doodling. She had been translating. She had taken the dense, linear language of the conjecture and had turned it into the language of shape and space. A language she understood better than words. A language her grandfather had taught her. The problem had spoken to her, and it had just told her its greatest secret. The sound of Mr. Tanaka's laughter was a weapon, and it struck Susan with physical force. Each cruel chuckle from the crowd was another blow. She shrank into herself, wishing she could become invisible. All she could see was her daughter, a tiny, defiant figure engulfed by the glowing symbol of their humiliation. But through the haze of her own shame, she saw that Chloe was not broken. Her daughter was not even looking at the laughing crowd. Her focus was entirely on the screen, a deep, silent communion with the puzzle before her. The laughter began to falter as Chloe moved again. The murmurs of confusion returned. She touched the stylus to the screen, and, with a few quick, deft strokes, she began to connect the vertices of the shapes she had drawn. Lines crisscrossed the screen, creating a new, more complex web. Then, at each intersection, she began to write numbers, equations. The academics in the room leaned forward, their expressions changing from amusement to curiosity, and then to disbelief. "Wait a minute," a young professor near the front whispered, his eyes wide. "Look at that notation. That's a Fourier transform, but applied to a polyhedral group. That's not supposed to be possible." Chloe was working with a speed and confidence that was mesmerizing. The stylus flew across the screen, leaving a trail of elegant, crystalline logic in its wake. She was no longer scribbling. She was building something. She was constructing a proof, but she was doing it in a way none of them had ever seen before. She was weaving together disparate branches of mathematics, geometry, number theory, abstract algebra, as if they were threads of a single, beautiful tapestry. Kenji Tanaka's laughter had stopped completely. He watched, a thin, unreadable smile frozen on his face. His arms were still crossed, a posture of relaxed superiority, but his eyes were narrowed. This was not in the script. The air in the atrium grew thick with a new kind of tension. The amusement was gone, replaced by a deep, unsettling wonder. What was this child doing? "She's not solving it head-on," the young professor said, his voice now filled with awe. He was speaking to Dr. Croft, the university president, who stood beside him, equally transfixed. "She's flanking it. She's redefined the problem's dimensional space. She's essentially translated it into a different mathematical language, a language where the paradoxes resolve themselves." Dr. Croft stared at the small girl. "Who is she?" he breathed. Chloe was in a world of her own now. The room, the people, the pressure, it had all faded away. There was only the problem, the beautiful, complex, wonderful problem. She could feel the pieces clicking into place, the logic flowing through her like music. It was a feeling she knew well. It was the feeling of clarity, of seeing the deep, hidden structure of things. It was her gift. It was her legacy. Her grandfather, Robert Miller, had been a quiet man who smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. He had never spoken much about the war. He had been a codebreaker, one of the quiet geniuses who worked in secret, fighting a war of numbers and patterns. He had told her that numbers were not just tools for counting. They were a story, the story of the universe itself. Everything has a shape, Chloe, he used to say, sketching on a napkin in their small kitchen. Even a number. Even a secret. If you can find the shape of the problem, you can find the shape of the answer. He had taught her to see the shapes. He had taught her his strange, secret language of geometric logic. After what felt like an eternity, but was perhaps only 20 minutes, Chloe paused. She had filled a vast section of the screen with a dense, shimmering lattice of equations. She stood back and looked at her work. It was a breathtaking structure, a cathedral of pure reason. She then erased all of it. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Had she failed? Had she hit a wall? Mr. Tanaka's cruel smile returned. It seems the little bird has flown as high as she can, he sneered. But Chloe hadn't erased it because it was wrong. She had erased it because she no longer needed it. The scaffolding had been built, and she had used it to climb to the top. Now she could see the final answer. She didn't need to show all of her work. She only needed to state the truth. She turned to a clean section of the screen. With a hand that did not tremble, she wrote a single, final line of symbols. It was short, elegant, and devastatingly simple. Underneath it, she wrote 3 letters. QED. She set the stylus down on the lectern. The small click echoed in the dead silent room. She turned to face Kenji Tanaka. Her face was calm, her blue eyes clear and direct. There was a smudge of light from the screen on her cheek. There, she said. Her voice was not boastful. It was a simple statement of fact. The answer. A wave of utter disbelief rolled through the crowd. It was impossible. It couldn't be that simple. The world's greatest minds had struggled with this for decades. She had solved it in under half an hour, and her final proof was a single line. A tall, elderly man with a shock of white hair and kind, intelligent eyes pushed his way to the front. He was Dr. Alistair Finch, a visiting professor from Cambridge and a holder of the Fields Medal, the highest honor in mathematics. He was arguably the most respected mathematician in the building. He stared at the single line on the screen, his mouth slightly open. He walked closer, squinting, tracing the logic in his mind. The seconds stretched into an eternity. The entire room waited for his verdict. Finally, he turned away from the screen. He looked not at the crowd, but at the small, blonde-haired girl standing on the dais. His expression was one of profound, soul-shaking awe. "My God," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. He then turned to the silent audience. "It's correct," he said, his voice growing stronger. "It's not just correct, it's revolutionary. The simplicity of it, it's the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." The room erupted. It was not laughter this time. It was a spontaneous, thunderous wave of applause, mixed with shouts of disbelief and gasps of wonder. The professors, the trustees, the alumni, they were all on their feet, clapping, cheering, staring at the small girl in the blue sweatshirt as if she had just performed a miracle. Because she had. Susan sank into a nearby chair, her legs no longer able to support her. The tears flowed freely now, but they were not tears of shame. They were tears of shock, of relief, of a fierce, overwhelming love for her extraordinary child. But the loudest sound in the room was the silence of one man. Kenji Tanaka stood as if he had been turned to stone. His face was white. His jaw was slack. His eyes were wide with a horror that went far beyond the loss of money. This was a public execution of his arrogance. He had built his world on the foundation of his own superiority, and a 12-year-old girl had just demolished it in front of everyone who mattered to him. The very laws of the universe, he felt, had personally betrayed him. Chloe walked across the dais until she stood directly in front of him. She held out her empty hand, palm up. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but carried the weight of a judge delivering a sentence. "You made a promise, Mr. Tanaka." Kenji Tanaka's world had been reduced to 2 things: the face of the small girl in front of him and the crushing weight of $100 million. His mind, a finely tuned instrument for calculating risk and maximizing profit, was short-circuiting. The numbers were all wrong. The variables were impossible. A janitor's daughter. A silly, public joke. An unsolvable problem. None of it computed. He stared at Chloe's outstretched hand. It was small, clean, and steady. It was the hand of a child, yet at that moment, it held more power than his entire board of directors. It was a demand for a debt he never intended to pay, a debt forged in his own public mockery. His first instinct was to lash out, to call her a cheat, to claim it was a trick, a pre-calculated stunt. But as he looked past her to the sea of faces in the crowd, he saw that was impossible. He saw the rapturous expression on the face of Alistair Finch, a man whose reputation was as solid as the mathematical truths he studied. He saw the university professors nodding to each other, their faces alight with the thrill of discovery. He saw the guests, his guests, looking at him, their expressions a mixture of awe for the girl and a cold, waiting curiosity for his response. They had all been witnesses. He had set the stage, written the script, and cast the players. He had simply expected a different ending. "This is preposterous," he finally managed to say, his voice a low, strangled rasp. It lacked its usual commanding tone. It was the sound of a king who had just been checkmated by a pawn. "You made an offer, Mr. Tanaka," Dr. Croft, the university president, said, stepping forward. His earlier timidity was gone, replaced by a firm, protective stance. He stood slightly behind Chloe, a silent guardian. A verbal contract, in front of more than 100 witnesses. It was a figure of speech. Tanaka hissed, his composure cracking. "A joke. You can't possibly hold me to that." Dr. Finch stepped forward, his kind eyes now hard as diamonds. "A joke, Mr. Tanaka? You found it amusing to publicly humiliate a working woman and her child? You used the platform of this great university, a place of learning and integrity, to stage a cruel piece of theater for your own entertainment. And you used my field, my beautiful mathematics, as your weapon." He gestured to the screen, where Chloe's single, elegant line of proof still glowed. "That is not a joke. That is a work of genius. A gift. And this child," he said, his voice ringing with authority, "has just given this institution a discovery more valuable than your entire donation. A discovery you tried to tarnish with your petty cruelty." The crowd murmured in agreement. The tide of opinion had turned against him completely. He was no longer the powerful benefactor. He was the villain of the story. Chloe had not moved. Her hand was still outstretched. Her gaze was unwavering. She was the calm center of the storm that was tearing Kenji Tanaka's world apart. "The money, Mr. Tanaka," she said again, her voice quiet but insistent. "My mother has debts." The simple, honest statement was more devastating than any accusation. It cut through all the pretense and ego and laid the situation bare. This wasn't about genius or pride. It was about a daughter trying to save her mother. Tanaka looked at Susan. She was on her feet now, standing a few steps behind Chloe, her face streaked with tears but her back straight. For the first time, he saw her not as a piece of furniture in his world, but as a person. He saw the fierce, protective love in her eyes. He saw the years of hardship etched on her face. And in that moment, he understood that he had not just lost a bet. He had lost a war of character against people he considered less than human. With a final, shuddering breath of defeat, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek, black phone. His hands trembled slightly as he tapped the screen. He spoke a few sharp, clipped words in Japanese to the person who answered. Then he put the phone away. "My lawyers will be in contact with the university in the morning," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "They will arrange the transfer of funds to a trust for the child." He could not bring himself to look at her as he said it. He turned on his heel and strode toward the exit, his back ramrod straight. His security detail scrambled to clear a path. The crowd parted for him, but this time, it was not out of respect. It was out of contempt. As he walked, he could feel their stares like daggers in his back. He had entered the atrium as a sun god. He was leaving as a black hole, an empty, collapsed star. As the doors hissed shut behind him, a profound silence fell over the room once more. It lasted for a single heartbeat. Then, the applause started again. It was a warm, genuine, and joyous sound. It was for Chloe. Professors and donors crowded around her, their voices a babble of congratulations and excited questions. "How did you see that geometric relationship? Have you studied tensor calculus? What is your name, young lady?" Chloe seemed overwhelmed by the sudden, intense attention. She took a step back, her composure finally beginning to fray. She looked for her mother. Susan pushed through the crowd and wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her tight. "It's okay, baby," she whispered into Chloe's blonde hair. "It's over. You did it." Chloe buried her face in her mother's uniform, the smell of clean linen and hard work a familiar comfort. "I just wanted him to stop being mean to you, Mama," she mumbled. Dr. Finch approached them, his smile gentle. He addressed the crowd of academics. Let's give the young lady and her mother some space, shall we? Genius needs room to breathe. He gracefully shepherded the well-wishers away, leaving Susan and Chloe in a small, quiet bubble. Your daughter, Mrs. Miller, he said to Susan, his voice filled with a deep, paternal warmth, is a very special person. I have never seen anything like it. Susan looked down at the top of Chloe's head, her heart aching with a love so fierce it almost hurt. I don't understand any of it, she confessed. Her father, my husband, he loved math. He was an engineer. Chloe has all his old books. I thought she was just playing. This is not play, madam, Dr. Finch said softly. This is a symphony. He looked at Chloe. Where did you learn to think like that, my dear? That method, it's so unconventional, so elegant. Chloe peeked out from her mother's embrace. She looked at the kind old man, at his intelligent, curious eyes, and she felt safe. My grandpa taught me, she said quietly. Your grandfather? Dr. Finch asked, intrigued. Was he a mathematician? Chloe shook her head. He was a soldier, she said. He was a codebreaker. In the Cold War. The statement hung in the air, a piece of a puzzle Dr. Finch hadn't known existed. A codebreaker. It made a strange kind of sense. The Cold War had been a secret war fought with logic and patterns, a war of minds. Codebreakers didn't just solve problems. They looked for the hidden language beneath them. They looked for the shape of the secret. He told me everything has a secret name. Chloe continued, her voice growing a little stronger as she remembered. He said that if you can learn its real name, you have power over it. Numbers, problems, secrets, they all have a name. You just have to listen in the right way. Her grandfather, Robert Miller, had been a ghost. He had spent 30 years of his life in a windowless room, listening to the static of the world, searching for the whispers of enemy code. He had learned to see patterns in chaos, to find meaning in random noise. When he retired, the silence of the civilian world was deafening to him. His mind, trained for a secret war, was a brilliant engine with no purpose. So he had poured all of it into his granddaughter. He had not taught her multiplication tables or long division. He had taught her the art of seeing. He had given her puzzle boxes and ciphers. He had taught her how to look at a complex system, a knot, a chess game, an engine, and find the one critical point that held it all together. He had taught her his secret language of shapes, a form of geometric visualization that allowed him to map complex codes as physical objects in his mind. He had recognized the same fire in her, the same intuitive grasp of abstract structures. He had given her the keys to a kingdom she never knew she was born to rule. He had passed on his legacy, a legacy forged in the silent, secret war of numbers. He had died just before her father got sick, leaving her with a mind full of his beautiful, strange tools. He gave me a name for this problem, Chloe said, looking up at the screen. He would have called it the unwieldy fortress. He said that you never attack a fortress at its strongest wall. You find the secret door that the builder forgot to lock. Dr. Finch stared at the girl, a profound understanding dawning on his face. She hadn't just solved a math problem. She had deciphered it. She had treated it like an enemy code, and she had found the key. A key her grandfather had given her years ago. A man in a sharp suit, who had been standing quietly at the edge of the circle, now stepped forward. He had a warm, genuine smile. He was not one of the academics. He was a trustee of the university and the CEO of a major aerospace company. He held out a business card. He offered it to Susan. My company builds some of the most complex guidance systems in the world, he said, his voice calm and respectful. We have an educational foundation. We fund gifted young people. We give full scholarships to the best universities. MIT, Caltech, Princeton, wherever your daughter wants to go. When she's old enough, I want you to call me. We will pay for everything. A mind like hers is a resource the world cannot afford to waste. Susan looked at the small, heavy piece of cardstock, then up at the kind, smiling man. For the first time that night, the full weight of what had happened crashed down on her. The fear, the humiliation, the impossible triumph. It was too much. Tears of pure, unadulterated hope welled in her eyes. The mountain of medical bills on her kitchen table suddenly seemed like a small hill. The future, which had been a dark, terrifying tunnel, now held a brilliant, blinding light at its end. She took the card. Thank you, sir, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. He nodded, then looked at Chloe with admiration. Your grandfather would be very proud of you, young lady. Susan and Chloe walked out of the atrium, leaving behind a crowd of stunned intellectuals and the ghost of Kenji Tanaka's pride. They stepped out into the crisp, cool night air. The city lights below seemed to shine a little brighter. The weight of their debt, of their fear, was not gone, but it had been transformed. It was no longer a chain holding them down, but a story to be told. A story of how a mother's quiet dignity and a daughter's hidden genius had faced down a bully and won. They walked hand in hand across the manicured lawns of the campus. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. In the quiet space between them, they could both feel the presence of the two men they had lost, a brilliant, gentle engineer and a silent, secret codebreaker. Tonight, their legacy had been honored. And back in the silent atrium, a team of janitors was cleaning up the last of the broken glass from the champagne spill that had started it all. The giant screen had been turned off, but in the minds of everyone who had been there, the image of a single, beautiful line of logic still burned brightly, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most powerful truths are spoken in the quietest voices. The walk home was a journey through a dream. The university campus, with its grand stone buildings and manicured lawns, seemed to belong to another world, one they had only been visiting. Susan and Chloe walked side by side, their hands clasped tightly. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was filled with the deafening roar of everything that had just happened. Susan kept touching the business card in her pocket. The crisp, heavy cardstock felt like the only solid object in a world that had suddenly turned to liquid. It was a talisman, a proof that the night had been real. A full scholarship. MIT. Caltech. Words she had only ever seen in movies, possibilities that belonged to other people's children. When they reached their small, second-floor apartment, the familiar sight of its worn blue door was a comfort and a shock. It looked exactly the same, but they were different. The air inside smelled of their life, of old books, of the lemon-scented cleaner Susan used, of the faint, lingering scent of the soup they'd had for dinner 2 nights ago. It was the smell of struggle, of making do. As Susan locked the door behind them, the dam of her composure finally broke. She leaned her back against the door and slid down to the floor, her shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. It was all too much. The terror of the confrontation, the profound humiliation, the blinding shock of Chloe's triumph, and now, the dawning, terrifying light of hope. Chloe knelt in front of her, her young face a mask of concern. She put her small arms around her mother's neck. Did I do something wrong, Mama? Susan pulled her into a fierce embrace, burying her face in her daughter's hair. No, baby, no. She choked out, her voice thick with tears. You did everything right. You were so brave. I can't believe it. They stayed like that for a long time, 2 survivors clinging to each other on the shore after a shipwreck. The $100 million was still an abstract, impossible number. But the relief, the raw, gut-wrenching relief of a future suddenly cleared of its most monstrous obstacle, that was real. The medical debt that had been a suffocating weight on Susan's chest for 2 long years had, in the space of 20 minutes, vanished. He was so mean to you, Chloe said, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. He made you look so small. I wanted to make him small. Susan pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked at her daughter, at the fierce, protective fire in her bright blue eyes, and she saw not just a child, but the legacy of 2 good men. The gentle intelligence of her husband, and the quiet, unbending strength of her father. You did, honey, she said, a watery smile touching her lips. I think you made him feel very small indeed. The next morning, their world exploded. The story was everywhere. It was the kind of human interest narrative that news outlets dream of: the billionaire, the janitor, and the child prodigy. 12-year-old daughter of university janitor solves impossible Tanaka Conjecture, screamed one headline. Billionaire publicly humiliated, forced to pay $100 million prize, shouted another. Their small apartment building was besieged by news vans. Reporters camped out on their lawn, shouting questions whenever they caught a glimpse of a shadow moving behind the curtains. The university, guided by Dr. Croft and Dr. Finch, moved quickly to protect them. They put them up in a quiet, private suite at the university's guest hotel and handled all the media inquiries. Lawyers, appointed by the university's trust department, materialized to manage the financial transfer. It was a dizzying, overwhelming whirlwind. For Susan, the most surreal moment came 3 days after the gala. She was sitting with a kind, soft-spoken lawyer named Mr. Gable in a quiet university office. He pushed a tablet across the polished mahogany table towards her. On the screen was a bank statement. It was an account in Chloe's name, held in trust. At the top of the screen was a number, $100 million. Susan stared at it. She traced the number with her finger. The zeros seemed to stretch on into infinity. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. The first thing we'd like to do, Mrs. Miller, Mr. Gable said gently, is address your outstanding liabilities. If you have a list of the medical debts. Her hand trembled as she slid a worn, folded bundle of papers from her purse. The final, consolidated bills from her husband's long illness. The numbers on those pages had haunted her sleep for 2 years. Mr. Gable took the papers, flattened them out, and began typing figures into his own tablet. He made a few clicks. He looked up. It's done, he said. They've all been paid. In full. Susan felt a lightness in her chest, a physical sensation, as if a great stone had been lifted from her heart. She closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer of thanks to a husband she still missed every day. It was over. The fight was over. Meanwhile, Dr. Alastair Finch had become a man possessed. He wasn't interested in the money or the media circus. He was captivated by something far more profound, the sheer, breathtaking beauty of Chloe's proof. He spent hours in his office, the screen from the atrium replicated on his own monitors, studying the geometric scaffolding she had built and then discarded. It was the method that fascinated him. It was unlike any established mathematical discipline he knew. It was intuitive, visual, and devastatingly effective. It was, as Chloe had said, a way of finding the secret name of the problem. He was a mathematician, but this felt like something more. It felt like magic. Intrigued by Chloe's story about her grandfather, the Cold War codebreaker, he decided to do some research. He called a few old contacts, friends in London and Washington, D.C., men who knew their way around the dusty, declassified archives of the intelligence world. I'm looking for information on a man named Robert Miller. He explained over a secure line to a friend at the National Security Archive. American, worked in signals intelligence, probably from the early 50s through the late 70s. That's a common name, Alastair, his friend replied. And that's a very secretive time. What did he do? That's the thing, Finch said, looking at the glowing equations on his screen. I think he may have invented a new kind of mathematics. A week later, a thick, manila envelope with no return address arrived at Dr. Finch's university office. Inside were photocopies of heavily redacted documents. Most of it was technical jargon and censored reports. But one document, a partially declassified internal memo from 1978, made the old professor's heart stop. The memo was a final performance review for an analyst named Robert Miller, written upon his retirement. It described him as a singular talent, with a profoundly unconventional but highly effective analytical method. It mentioned his crucial role in breaking a complex Soviet cipher known only as Zarathustra. But it was the appendix that made Finch's blood run cold. The appendix contained a sample of Miller's work, a handwritten page of notes. On it was a series of geometric shapes, hexagons and dodecahedrons, interlinked in a complex pattern. It was a simplified, embryonic version of the exact same visual language Chloe had used on the screen. But there was one more document, a single, barely legible page from a different file. It was a note about the Zarathustra cipher. It mentioned that the cipher was believed to have been compromised, not by Allied intelligence, but through industrial espionage in the late 1980s, after the Cold War had begun to thaw. A Japanese technology corporation, then a fledgling defense contractor, had acquired parts of the Zarathustra source code through illicit channels. The name of that corporation was Tanatech. Dr. Finch sat back in his chair, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with a terrible, beautiful clarity. Kenji Tanaka hadn't just invented his conjecture out of thin air. He hadn't just picked a random, unsolved problem. He had found something in the sealed archives of his own company's sordid history, a fragment of a brilliant, broken Soviet code. A code that had been so complex, so advanced, that even with the partial key, his own mathematicians couldn't fully crack it. They didn't understand its underlying logic. Seeing its impossibility as a mark of its genius, Tanaka, in his supreme arrogance, had polished it, reframed it as a problem in pure number theory, and attached his own name to it. He had turned a stolen piece of a secret war into a monument to his own intellect, confident that no one in the world could ever solve it because its true context, its secret language, had been lost to history. He never imagined that the man who broke the code in the first place had a granddaughter, and that he had taught her his secret language. A few days later, Dr. Finch invited Susan and Chloe to his office. It was a warm, comfortable room, lined from floor to ceiling with books. He sat them down and, with a gentle, quiet voice, he told them what he had found. He showed them the copies of the documents, the page with Robert Miller's familiar, elegant shapes. Susan listened, her hand on Chloe's shoulder, a sense of profound wonder dawning on her face. Her father, the quiet, unassuming man who smelled of pipe tobacco and loved to solve crossword puzzles, had been a silent warrior in a secret war. Chloe looked at the papers, at her grandfather's handwriting. She felt a deep, resonant connection, a sense of a story coming full circle. It wasn't just her victory anymore. It was his. So the problem, Susan said, trying to grasp the enormity of it. It wasn't just a random math problem. No, Dr. Finch said, his eyes shining. It was a ghost. It was a piece of your father's history, Mrs. Miller. A secret he unlocked decades ago. Mr. Tanaka stole the lock, put his name on it, and dared the world to find a key he thought no longer existed. He looked at Chloe, his expression a mixture of academic admiration and pure human awe. But he forgot to account for the keymaker's bloodline. The truth settled over them, beautiful and complete. The $100 million was no longer just a prize won in a moment of defiance. It was a debt of history, paid back across generations. It was the universe balancing its books. Kenji Tanaka, in his effort to humiliate a poor woman, had inadvertently returned a stolen piece of intellectual property to its rightful heir, with $100 million in interest. The final, perfect piece of irony fell into place. The name of the Soviet cipher her grandfather had broken, Zarathustra, was a reference to a book by the philosopher Nietzsche, a book about the coming of a Superman. Tanaka had tried to cast himself as that Superman. But the true Superman had been a quiet codebreaker, working in a windowless room, who had passed his true power, the power of his mind, down to his granddaughter. Chloe looked out the window of Dr. Finch's office, across the sun-dappled lawns of the university. Her future, once a narrow, uncertain path, was now a wide-open landscape of infinite possibility. She would go to college. She would study the beautiful, secret language of numbers. She would build things, discover things, and carry the quiet legacy of her grandfather into a new world. The story was not about the money. It was not even about the humiliation of a cruel man. It was about a promise, whispered from a grandfather to a granddaughter. The promise that everything has a secret name, a hidden shape, and that if you are quiet enough and brave enough, and you listen in the right way, the universe will always, eventually, tell you the answer. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.